as Mika arrived in the new mess hall and got her lunch, finding out that today's lunch meal was a warm stew, complete with fresh buttered bread, straight from the oven, and mashed hora roots. She took her tray to a more private section of the mess hall and sat down to commence eating. As she ate her way through her meal, she still couldn't help but think about tracking her old captain down, all of the ins and outs, the dangers that might be involved. Her new ship would give her some new leverage, but with a ship as powerful as Exovol, it was always possible that it would also attract unwanted attention. She was actually thinking about simply making a large shuttle pod and traveling to the planet on that, along with a security team, ditching the uniforms in favor of some more casual attire. It would be better if they looked scuzzy, look too stand-up, and you get shut out of the abysmal places that our old captain tended to do business, especially on this world. It wouldn't work if people didn't trust her as a common criminal. If she looked like some sort of authoritarian figure, it would work to her disadvantage. And she thought to herself, while taking spoonfuls of her soup, noshing on the freshly buttered bread. All of the food was, well, quite frankly, delicious. Much better than she was used to on her old vessel. Even the meals that she's been eating up until now paled in comparison to the meals that she was now becoming accustomed to on board of Exovol. With their new chef, everything seemed to be above standard. Just then, as she was lost in thought, staring into her soup, she completely lost track of her surroundings, as she was surprised to hear the clanking of a tray at the table with her, as she looked across to see Raimi, who she had seen darting about the ship here or there, but with the current run of events hadn't had much time to speak to. "Hey, Captain Mika," Raimi said, a bright smile on his face. "Well, how are you feeling?" "Well, I'm feeling okay, Raimi. I suppose. I'm a little bit upset for obvious reasons." "Yeah," Raimi replied. "I heard about the old captain still being alive. It sort of put a damper in my day, too. But I'm sure that he's going to be no match for us now. I mean, really, just look at the ship we have. There's no way he can hold a candle to us." "Yes, well, I hope not. But, though I hate his guts, he's not a complete imbecile. It'd be smart to at least give him the benefit of the doubt and assume that he's not going to be a complete pushover. Last time I was able to catch him off guard, in a location that worked to our advantage, and at a time when he was absolutely the least prepared for it. I mean, seriously, who could have ever seen it coming? The Kraken turning out to be a super advanced starship? After all of the people he threw into it, how could he have ever known that I would have been the one to wake him up, so to speak? But next time, there's no telling what the situation's going to be, so I'd rather be prepared than optimistic. But I suppose that's more than I should really be telling you. Let's get off of war chat. Don't worry about the old captain. You've got a new captain now, and she wants to know what you've been up to," Mika said, smiling as she reached over and gave Raimi a pat on the head. Raimi smiled, blushing a bit. "Yes, Captain," he replied. "Well, I've had lots of free time since all of this stuff started happening, so I figured I might as well take advantage of all these new people on the ship, and see if I can learn some stuff, maybe become a full-fledged member of the crew. So I've been asking around, Luckily for me, the people on board Exovol are way nicer than the people on board the old ship. They were all jerks. But most of these people seem very nice. Well, Mia scares me a bit. And Dolus doesn't really want to talk whenever he's on duty. But he seems to be a completely different person when he's not working. Someone asked me to deliver a message to him when he was off duty, and I found him in the new recreation room. He was playing some game he claimed was native to his world. He even invited me to play with him. It was actually a little bit strange. He was a completely different person. He smiled and laughed, and even when I messed up with the rules, he didn't scold me. In fact, it almost felt like he enjoyed teaching me. He was really nice. Oh, is that so? Mika replied. Well, I'm glad you two got along. Yeah, the only thing is, the next time I bumped into him, he was working again. And he was back to his usual self. He basically blew me off and told me he didn't have time for any questions, as he was busy completing his work, and I might negatively affect his overall potential, according to him. Mika laughed. Yes, that does sound like him. Much more like the one that I'm accustomed to as well. Well, regardless, Rainy replied, rubbing his head a bit. I spent some time talking to different people around the ship, and I collected some aberrant data. The most helpful one was Exovol himself, as the aberrant data concerns him. I decided that if I'm going to have a purpose on this ship, I'd like it to be an important one. So I started researching Exovol himself. Researching Exovol? I'm not sure what you mean by that, Mika replied. Well, it's pretty simple. We don't really know that much about Exovol, right? In fact, even Exovol doesn't really know that much about himself. All of his data was lost in some sort of catastrophe. So I figured I'd work with him and some others to start analyzing, work out exactly how it is that Exovol works in general. And I've actually found out some pretty useful information. I was hoping to share it with you, Remy said, starting to grow excited as he pulled a data pad out of his uniform. Sure, Remy. If you found anything out, I'd love to hear it. Awesome, Remy replied excitedly. Okay, so the first bit of information that I found out is that Exovol is actually capable of building nanites. What? Mika replied. I mean, I thought he was nanotech. How can he build it? Apparently, it's part of his core programming, a part that was protected very heavily within each and every nanite. Lies the information necessary to reproduce itself. It's hardwired into their very construction, so no measure of data loss would ever interrupt it or stop it from being functional. Yes, that does sound interesting, Mika replied. But why would Exovol need to construct nanites? Well, that's part of the next part of what I found out. Apparently, Exovol's nanites get damaged all the time. The intense processes of constructing and reconstructing, breaking down, countless different materials and forging things, making them into whatever he needs them to be. They all put wear and tear on the nanites that he's made of. Eventually, those nanites wear out and break down, at which point they simply become hunks of metal that Exovol uses in constructing other things, no different than any other material. But in order to fix that problem, it would essentially function like an endless loop, with him constantly losing nanites until there was nothing of them left. So, the nanites have the ability to duplicate themselves, create copies, in order to refill his overall nanite form. Yes, that does sound like a good idea, but it also sounds a bit scary, Mika said, beginning to scratch at her chin a bit as she thought it over. Well, yeah, but this is the most interesting part. The final part about what I was able to find out was that exovol actually has a hard limit on exactly how many nanites he can reproduce. That too is built into their construction. They constantly keep track of their overall numbers. If nanites leave outside of exovol's control or are detached in some way, then they break themselves down, initiating a sort of self-destruct, so they can't be captured or duplicated later. The different nanites that exovol is made up of actually work in unison in order to create new ones. All that's needed in order to completely restore exovol back to his full form is that at least one of all 6 different types of nanites that exist within his form survive whatever the process or event was that destroyed the others. As long as that's left, he can rebuild himself with no issues whatsoever. But it's not infinite. He can't just keep building nanites as much as he wants. Once he hits a certain number of nanites, then no matter what he does, even if he tries to order it himself, or it comes from someone that he's given authority over him, he can't build any more past that point. It's a hard limit. Apparently, exovol was already at the hard limit when we found him in the junkyard. But wait, that doesn't make any sense, Mika said. If exovol was already at his hard limit, then how is it that he's been able to grow and to expand himself this much? Well, that's because he's just moving around other materials. His core nanite form always stays the same. All of the auxiliary materials and elements that are part of the ships that he's absorbed, and all of the weaponry, armament, and equipment that he's taken in, remain separate. They're not actually nanotech. Exovol simply spreads himself out, sort of like the same way that we put garlic on the bread that we're eating, and butter and stuff like that. It's just a thin coat over an already present material that allows him to sense and perceive what's going on with it, and then move his primary nanite form in order to interact with it in more profound ways. But the primary number of nanites that he has always remains constant, and if any are destroyed, then he simply replaces them. But here's the important part in this mix. The fact that exovol's primary nanite structure remains the same always and can't grow beyond that extent means that the larger we make exovol's non-nanite structure, the more difficult it'll be for him to actually manipulate that structure and interact with all of the countless parts. Okay, Mika said, looking across to Rainy. That is definitely some useful information, Rainy. You must have worked very hard to learn that. Thank you very much. For all I know, that information might just save our lives one of these days. All of these other crew members better watch out. If you keep this up, you might be out to replace them, Rainy, Mika said, smiling over to Rainy. Thanks, Captain, he said, rubbing the back of his head as he nervously looked down at his food and began eating very quickly, as he seemed to be a bit flustered. Mika smiled, finally feeling a bit more at ease, and now, with the other more serious matters off her mind, she finally began to eat her lunch with a sense of calm and relaxation, and of course, friendly and welcome company.